An isolated magnate, a tour guide full of dreams, and an unusual proposal. What could possibly bring together two such different worlds? When Ben Maxwell meets Emma Morgan, fate ties a knot that even they cannot untangle. Get ready for a story where love, resilience, and the search for renewal change everything except the heart. In the vastness of his eco-mansion, Ben Maxwell often walked alone through halls lit by sunlight captured directly by the solar panels he himself designed. He had everything, or at least, that's what the headlines suggested. But within the silence of those modern walls was a man who, day after day, faced loneliness like someone staring into an unsettling mirror. At 40 years old, with a fortune built through sweat and innovation, he was the face of sustainability. Yet, ironically, his soul seemed to be in ruins. Behind the impeccable facade was still a boy, scarred by the hardships of a lost childhood. Ben grew up in a rural community where clean water was a luxury and electricity, a distant dream. His mother, a woman with a generous heart, was the pillar of his life, but her death left him orphaned of both affection and hope. It was in that suffocating absence that he found the inspiration to change the world, a promise whispered to the wind that no one else would endure what he had. Yet, even amid accolades and achievements, the emptiness persisted. There was something no solar panel could ever illuminate: his own heart. Meanwhile, in another corner of the world, Emma Morgan rose early to begin another day at the small national park where she worked. At 28, she was a mix of resilience and exhaustion, trying to balance tight finances and the care of her ailing grandmother. Despite the struggles, Emma maintained a spark in her eyes that captivated everyone she met. She didn't know exactly how, but she dreamed of transforming her passion for nature into something bigger, a business that combines sustainable tourism with environmental education. Her days, however, were a constant battle. With almost empty pockets but a heart full of hope, Emma found joy in sharing the beauty of nature with the tourists she guided. It was as if, for a few hours, she could offer them what was sorely missing from her own life: a moment of connection, a pause to breathe deeply. Yet the feeling that something was missing never quite left her. Ben, in his isolated tower, and Emma, in the heart of simplicity, seemed to live in entirely different universes. He, a man who had reached the top but felt lost. She, a woman still at the beginning of her journey but brimming with determination. And yet, both carried within them the same need: the renewal of their souls. Little did they know that fate, with its mysterious insistence, was already weaving the thread that would unite their stories. While Ben meticulously guarded himself from the emotional chaos he so feared, Emma managed a controlled mess filled with challenges that tested her patience. They didn't know each other, but something invisible connected them: the desire to do something meaningful, something that would leave the world better than they found it. And even without realizing it, both were already on a path toward a meeting that would change everything. If there was one thing Ben hated, it was dealing with situations beyond his control. That's why he hid behind the rigidity of his schedule and the walls of his mansion. But life, with its peculiar irony, seemed ready to pull the rug out from under him. For Emma, the discomfort was different. Every day felt like a reminder that, no matter how hard she tried, something was always missing. She dreamed of more, but more always seemed out of reach. Ben's mind was filled with the perfect calculations that built his fortune, but his heart couldn't solve the equations of human connection. Emma, on the other hand, had the sensitivity to see beyond surfaces, but the world seemed to place too many barriers between her and her goals. Both were trapped in different but equally complex labyrinths. It was an ordinary afternoon when the first piece of this puzzle began to move. Ben received an unexpected invitation that seemed to demand more than he was willing to give. And Emma, still unaware, was about to be placed on a path that would lead her to confront her deepest fears. Sometimes, life doesn't ask permission to begin a new journey. Ben stared at the invitation on his desk, frowning, while Emma wrapped up another exhausting day at the park. The gears of fate were turning, and both were about to feel their lives take an unexpected course. What they didn't know was that, together, they were about to discover the meaning of words that, until then, had seemed vague: gratitude, inspiration, renewal. Ben Maxwell had always believed his meticulously planned life was immune to surprises. until an unexpected invitation landed on his desk, coming directly from Nathaniel Beecham, the European magnate known for being as ruthless as he was visionary. The event promised to be one of the decade's most significant, bringing together global investors in a setting of luxury and rare opportunities. But there was one inconvenient detail. Nathaniel required Ben to bring a companion, a condition that seemed simple to most but felt like an affront to Ben's comfortable solitude. Ben's initial reaction was irritation. He hated being cornered, and this personal requirement challenged him in a way his logic couldn't process. It was as if Nathaniel had found the one flaw in his armor of self-sufficiency. Even so, Ben couldn't simply ignore the invitation. The project he was developing, a revolutionary clean energy system, depended on that funding. He knew that without Nathaniel's support, the dream he had built over years could crumble. Meanwhile, Emma Morgan's life continued its usual rhythm, though overshadowed by a cloud of worry. Her grandmother needed more expensive medication, and her salary as a tour guide barely covered basic expenses. Yet Emma held onto a stubborn optimism, believing that something good was on its way. Little did she know, the universe was about to cross her path with a man who, despite his wealth, desperately needed something only she could offer. In his eco-mansion, Ben paced back and forth, trying to find a solution. Hire someone? Ask a friend for help? Every idea seemed more absurd than the last. He didn't want to deal with emotions or personal connections. All he needed was a pleasant figure by his side, someone who could play the role without complications. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more it felt like he was about to embark on an adventure he wouldn't have chosen voluntarily. Nathaniel's invitation carried a weight that went beyond business. It was as if Ben was being tested not only on his ability to innovate but also on his capacity to connect. He felt the mounting pressure, which only made it harder to make a decision. For the first time in years, he caught himself thinking about how isolated he had become, as though his mansion and projects were walls he had built to keep the world out. Meanwhile, at the national park, Emma guided yet another group of tourists, her smile steady despite her exhaustion. Among them was Naomi, an executive from Maxwell Ventures who had been impressed by Emma's passion and authenticity. At that moment, Naomi had an idea that would change everything. Ben needed someone like Emma, someone not only charismatic but who also understood the value of what he stood for. Naomi brought up Emma to Ben that very evening during a casual meeting. At first, he dismissed the idea. How could someone he barely knew help him with something so delicate? But Naomi persisted, emphasizing that Emma had precisely the kind of authenticity he needed to showcase at the event. Reluctantly, Ben decided to watch a recording of one of Emma's tours to understand what Naomi was talking about. As Ben watched the footage, something stirred within him. Emma was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. Her connection with nature, her simple yet profound way of discussing complex topics, and the sparkle in her eyes as she spoke of her passion were genuine. For a moment, Ben wondered if she might be the answer he so desperately needed. But how could he convince her? Emma, on the other hand, had no idea she was being observed by someone so influential. Her life carried on as usual, filled with constant challenges and distant dreams. Still, something inside her hinted that a change was on the horizon. Perhaps it was just hope, or maybe destiny truly was about to knock on her door. That night, Ben picked up the phone and, with a hesitation he hadn't felt in years, asked Naomi to arrange a meeting with Emma. He didn't know how the conversation would go but knew he had to try. After all, sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple invitation or an inescapable need. When Ben Maxwell finally met Emma Morgan, he realized fate had a peculiar sense of humor. She was everything he didn't expect: direct, authentic, and skeptical. Emma didn't try to impress him, and that surprised him. When he presented his proposal with the practicality characteristic of a businessman, Emma didn't respond immediately. Instead, she raised an eyebrow and, with a cautious tone, asked, "Why me?" Ben wasn't used to being questioned. He explained the terms, emphasizing that it would be strictly professional. Emma listened in silence, but inside, a whirlwind of thoughts brewed. The offer seemed too good to be true. Who would hire an ordinary tour guide for an elite event? She doubted Ben's intentions, even if he appeared genuine in his approach. Deep down, It was hard to believe something so unexpected could change her life. Emma declined. She said she needed time to think but really wanted to distance herself from a situation so far removed from her reality. Ben, on the other hand, was torn between irritation and admiration. He didn't know what he had expected, but he certainly hadn't expected a no. For the first time in years, he felt disarmed, stripped of the confidence his contracts and negotiations usually provided. Back at the park, Emma tried to forget the conversation, but she couldn't. Ben's proposal was tempting and she knew it. The money could help with her grandmother's medical expenses, maybe even fund the start of her long-dreamed business. Still, there was something about Ben that unsettled her. He seemed genuine, but there was an air of detachment that made Emma hesitate. How could she trust someone so reserved? While Emma deliberated, Ben became more determined than ever. He didn't want to pressure her but knew Emma was the right person for the role. Naomi, ever pragmatic, suggested he give her time and show that his proposal had no hidden motives. Ben hated waiting but took the advice. Even so, his anxiety grew daily. For a man used to controlling everything, relying on someone else's decision was a test of patience he didn't want to face. Emma, meanwhile, began weighing the pros and cons. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity but also a risk. The idea of stepping into a world so different from hers felt intimidating but intriguing. What if it's a mistake, she wondered. But soon, another question emerged. What if it's the chance I've been waiting for? The doubt consumed her, and the shadow of her initial refusal became increasingly hard to sustain. Ben, in the meantime, spent hours reviewing the event's details. Each moment felt like an eternity, but he was willing to wait. For the first time, his unwavering efficiency gave way to uncertainty. He knew he needed Emma but also knew that if he forced the situation, he would lose any chance of having her by his side. The irony was clear. The man who created solutions to save the planet was trapped in a dilemma no technology could resolve. Days passed, and Emma finally decided to give the idea a chance. She called Naomi and asked for a second meeting with Ben. He arrived punctually, wearing the same serious expression, but there was something different about him, a glimmer of hope. Emma was still hesitant but agreed to hear more about the proposal. This time, Ben seemed more human, more vulnerable, and that made her reconsider her position. The conversation was long, filled with doubts and explanations. In the end, Emma agreed to participate, but with clear conditions. She wanted to ensure that this experience would be a fair exchange and wouldn't compromise who she was. Ben agreed without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something different, something that pushed him out of his comfort zone. As they shook hands to seal the agreement, something shifted in the air. It was the beginning of a partnership neither of them had expected but were both starting to accept. Deep down, Emma still had her reservations, and Ben knew the road wouldn't be easy. But sometimes, life only needs one step to start changing. When Naomi suggested that Emma consider Ben's invitation, she did so with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Naomi wasn't just a friend to Ben, she was also someone who understood the hidden layers he preferred to keep from the world. For Emma, Naomi became a point of balance between skepticism and curiosity. With an encouraging smile, Naomi said something to Emma that echoed in her mind for days. Sometimes opportunities don't show up the way we expect. Maybe the universe is calling you to something greater. Ben, on the other hand, trusted Naomi more than he trusted himself when it came to dealing with people. She knew how to interpret his silences and understand his intentions, even when he failed to communicate them. It was Naomi who insisted that Emma was the right choice, not just for the event but to bring a fresh perspective to Ben's methodical life. While Emma hesitated, Naomi became the bridge connecting their two worlds, a quiet guide amidst the emotional chaos they both faced. During a coffee meeting with Emma, Naomi did something Ben would never have done. She opened her heart. She talked about Ben's journey, his scars, his achievements, and, most importantly, how much he needed to learn to trust people again. Emma listened attentively, surprised by a story that felt so distant yet somehow familiar. It was as though, in some way, she could understand the weight Ben carried. Still, her hesitation remained. It was Naomi who planted the seed that made Emma reconsider. You don't need to change who you are, Naomi said firmly. Ben isn't looking for someone perfect, just someone who can show him the world is more than charts and numbers. Those words struck something deep in Emma. Perhaps, for the first time, she felt she could be more than a tour guide trying to make ends meet. Maybe she could be the catalyst for something bigger, even if she didn't yet know what that meant. Meanwhile, Ben was trying to prepare for his second meeting with Emma. Naomi had advised him to show vulnerability, something he considered a weakness. You want her to trust you, right? Then show her you trust her, Naomi insisted. Despite his reluctance, Ben decided to follow her advice. When Emma entered the room for the second conversation, she found a man who seemed less rigid, more willing to listen than to convince. Emma began to see something in Ben she hadn't noticed before, a certain humanity hidden beneath layers of formality. He wasn't just a magnate trying to solve a problem. There was something more. It was as if he, too, was searching for something, not just for the event but for himself. Naomi watched from a distance, satisfied to see the connection, however faint, beginning to take shape. In the days that followed, Emma and Ben communicated more frequently under Naomi's careful guidance. Each conversation brought new challenges but also revealed new possibilities. Emma began to see beyond Ben's serious exterior, while he started to admire her authenticity. It was Naomi who suggested the first practical steps, like preparing Emma for the event. She has the right essence, Naomi told Ben. She just needs the tools to shine on the right stage. Emma hesitated at the changes she would need to make: formal clothing, etiquette, rehearsed speeches. None of this was part of her reality. But Naomi encouraged her to look beyond the surface. You're not transforming into someone else, Emma. You're just showing the world what already exists within you. With those words, Emma began to embrace the idea that she could adapt without losing her essence. Ben, meanwhile, noticed how Emma's presence was starting to affect him. He, who had always prided himself on being unshakable, began to notice small cracks in his emotional armor. Naomi saw it all with a look of quiet satisfaction. For her, the role of mentor went beyond preparing Emma for the event. It was about helping them see the best in each other, and perhaps in themselves. That evening, while Ben reviewed the event's logistical details and Emma practiced her speech with Naomi, something was clear: they were closer than they ever could have imagined. Naomi, with her practical yet sensitive perspective, had done her part. Now, it was up to Ben and Emma to decide the next step. The beginning of Ben and Emma's collaboration was like two worlds attempting to align in an unstable orbit. Emma, though reluctant, finally decided to dive into the opportunity, while Ben, for the first time in years, prepared himself to let someone in, even if only in a controlled manner. Their first meeting to prepare for the event was filled with formalities. Ben explained the objectives with the precision of someone planning a multi-million-dollar campaign, while Emma listened, trying to hide her unease. Ben introduced her to a stylist he trusted, someone who would help Emma adapt her appearance to the sophisticated environment of the event. At first, she felt uncomfortable, as if she was stepping away from who she really was. But amid the wardrobe adjustments and suggestions, something began to shift. The stylist, kind and welcoming, wasn't trying to transform her but to highlight her essence. "You're not hiding yourself, Emma," she said. "You're showing the world who you really are." While Emma adjusted to the idea of a new image, Ben faced a different challenge: making space in his strict routine to include someone else. He wasn't used to making concessions, but something about Emma's presence disarmed him. She was straightforward, sometimes even too much, but that made him question himself. Their interactions were a constant reminder that life couldn't be calculated like a business model. In the days that followed, the two spent more time together. Emma immersed herself in Ben's world, learning about his vision for sustainability and the challenges he faced in balancing innovation with feasibility. On the other hand, Ben began to see Emma's genuine passion for sustainable tourism. She spoke about her ideas with such enthusiasm that, for a moment, he found himself caught up in her energy. Between speech rehearsals and posture adjustments, moments of vulnerability began to surface. One night, during a break, Ben opened up to Emma about his childhood. He spoke of losing his mother and the cold nights when he dreamed of something better. As she listened, Emma felt an unexpected connection. She knew what it felt like to bear the weight of responsibilities bigger than one's own dreams. Trust between them began to grow. Emma, who initially saw Ben as a distant and pragmatic man, now saw someone who also carried scars. And Ben, used to keeping people at a distance, began to admire Emma's courage in facing the unknown. Without realizing it, they were both crossing a threshold, not just for the event, but for an inner transformation that was only just beginning. One afternoon, as they reviewed final details, Ben paused to watch Emma. She gestured animatedly as she spoke, passionate about her ideas. It was in that moment he realized, she wasn't just a temporary partner for the event. Emma was a living reminder of something he had forgotten, the ability to connect with something greater than himself. Emma, meanwhile, felt as though she was charting new territory. With each passing day, she discovered she had more strength and adaptability than she'd imagined. There were moments of doubt, of course, but also moments of pure inspiration. And even without fully understanding it, she knew Ben was helping her uncover a version of herself that had always existed but never had the chance to emerge. As the day of the event approached, tension mounted. Ben reviewed every detail with his usual obsession for perfection, while Emma tried to prepare herself emotionally for what was to come. It was as if they were both walking a tightrope, balancing fear and expectation, the past and the future. The event day was drawing closer, and though both still carried doubts, something had changed. They were no longer alone in their journeys. Without realizing it, Ben and Emma had begun to form a partnership that, despite their differences, was proving to be surprisingly complementary. Deep down, they both knew the real test was yet to come. The days leading up to the event were intense. For Emma, it felt like every minute was an emotional endurance test. Ben prepared her for tough questions, rehearsed speeches alongside her, and even challenged her to think strategically. But no matter how dedicated she was, the pressure of representing someone so influential made her question whether she was truly up to the task. Ben noticed her unease and, in his own way, tried to reassure her. However, his words were like a mathematical formula, precise but devoid of warmth. Emma found an unexpected ally in the stylist Ben had hired. Beyond helping with her appearance, the stylist became a sort of confidant. "You don't need to impress anyone, Emma," she said one day. "Just show them who you are." Those words echoed in Emma's mind whenever fear threatened to overwhelm her. There was something comforting about knowing that her authenticity was her greatest strength, even in an environment where everything seemed superficial. For Ben, the challenges were of a different nature. He found himself torn between his growing admiration for Emma and his fear of allowing himself to feel anything. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, authentic, resilient, and above all, human. It disarmed him. But at the same time, he knew letting her into his life was a risk he wasn't sure he was ready to take. It was easier to focus on work, on goals, and avoid what felt so terrifying, the unknown. There was no shortage of adversaries along the way. Within the circle of investors, rumors about Ben's personal life began to surface. Some questioned his ability to build genuine relationships, suggesting his loneliness was a reflection of his calculating personality. This bothered him more than he was willing to admit, but as always, Ben maintained an impenetrable facade. Emma, however, began to notice how those criticisms affected him. Even without saying anything, she understood that more was at stake than just business. The preparations for the event turned into a battle of wills. Ben demanded perfection, while Emma insisted on maintaining her authenticity. "I'm not you, Ben," she said one day, frustrated after a rehearsal. "I'm not going to impress people with numbers or charts. If they're going to listen to me, it'll be because of my passion." Those words hit Ben like a lightning bolt. He realized he might have been trying to mold her into something she wasn't when, in reality, her strength lay precisely in what made her different. Amidst these trials, moments of camaraderie began to emerge. One night, after an exhausting day of rehearsals, Emma suggested they take a walk in the mansion's garden. Ben, reluctant at first, eventually gave in. During the walk, Emma shared childhood memories of the park where she worked, talking about the lessons nature had taught her. Ben listened attentively, something rare for him. In that moment, he began to see that Emma wasn't just a temporary collaborator. She was someone who brought something new and inspiring into his life. Tensions mounted as the event drew closer. Emma knew all eyes would be on her, expecting her to play her role perfectly. Ben, meanwhile, felt the weight of his reputation and the fear that everything might fall apart. Despite this, there was a growing sense of partnership between them. Each rehearsal, each conversation, seemed to bring them closer in a way neither had anticipated. The night before the event, Naomi made an unexpected visit to the mansion. With her usual sensitivity, she reminded them both that the most important thing wasn't what others thought, but what they represented together. "You two have something many people don't," Naomi said with a smile. "Authenticity. Don't underestimate the power of that." Those words lingered in their minds, offering a rare moment of calm before the storm. Even so, doubts persisted. Alone in her room, Emma stared at the elegant dress she would wear to the event and wondered if she was ready for what lay ahead. Ben, in his office, reviewed the details for the 10th time as if doing so might quiet the unease he felt. Both were engaged in their own internal battles but were starting to realize they weren't as alone as they thought. Deep down, the event wasn't just a test of their professional goals but also of who they were becoming. The journey to this point had been filled with challenges, unexpected allies, and invisible adversaries. The day of the event arrived like an inevitable wave, bringing with it a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Emma, standing in front of the mirror, adjusted her dress as she tried to calm her thoughts. The reflection staring back at her was someone different from the woman who, just days ago, hesitated to accept Ben's proposal. There was elegance, but also a vulnerability she couldn't hide. Deep down, she still felt like she was stepping into a world that wasn't hers. Ben, on the other hand, appeared colder than ever. Impeccably dressed, he meticulously analyzed every detail of the schedule, avoiding any conversation that wasn't strictly necessary. But inside, something was eating away at him. It was more than the pressure of presenting his project. It was the uncertainty of how Emma would handle an environment so hostile to outsiders. He knew the event was a test, not just for the future of his company but also for the partnership they had built. Entering the ballroom was a moment charged with tension. Bright lights, sophisticated conversations, and curious glances surrounded them as soon as they crossed the doors. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of expectations. Ben, by her side, maintained an unflappable expression, but a subtle touch on her arm surprised her. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, yet it seemed to say, "You're not alone." In the middle of the crowd, Nathaniel Beecham made his grand entrance. Tall, charismatic, and exuding authority, he approached Ben with a calculated smile. "Maxwell, we finally meet," he said, shaking Ben's hand firmly. His eyes turned to Emma, quickly assessing her. "And this must be your companion." "The pleasure to meet you." Emma, though nervous, lifted her chin and replied confidently, "Emma Morgan." "The pleasure is mine." As the evening progressed, Emma began to observe the social games unfolding around her. Every word, every gesture was carefully measured. Ben, while at ease in this environment, seemed less rigid when interacting with her. He introduced her naturally, highlighting her passion for sustainable tourism, which made her feel valued. Still, there were moments when Emma felt out of place, as though everyone around her was waiting for her to make a mistake. It was during a conversation with a small group of investors that Emma faced her first major challenge. One of them, speaking with a condescending tone, asked about her experience with sustainability. Emma hesitated for a moment but soon found her voice. With passion and clarity, she explained her vision of the connection between tourism and environmental preservation, using real examples from her work at the national park. Ben, standing beside her, watched with growing admiration, realizing Emma was shining in a way he could never have predicted. Meanwhile, Nathaniel observed everything from a distance. He seemed more interested in how Emma conducted herself than in Ben's technical presentations. For Nathaniel, the event was about more than numbers. It was about understanding the heart behind an idea. Ben recognized this and, for the first time, felt a nervousness unrelated to business. He knew Emma was doing well, but he also knew that, in the end, Nathaniel's decision would be as emotional as it was logical. Throughout the evening, small moments of camaraderie between Ben and Emma began to emerge. A whispered joke here, an encouraging look there. It was as though the intimidating environment was creating a bubble of connection between them. Ben, who once saw Emma as a practical solution, now saw her as a true partner, someone who brought something new and inspiring to his life. Yet, the pressure of the event remained. Every interaction was an opportunity or a risk, and Emma felt its weight. But instead of retreating, she began to feel more confident. Every smile from Ben, every word of encouragement, made her believe she was exactly where she needed to be. And deep down, Ben knew Emma was showing him something he had forgotten: the importance of being genuine, even in an environment that valued masks. As the evening approached its climax, Nathaniel called Ben and Emma for a private conversation. It was the decisive moment, the one that would determine not only the future of Ben's project but also the direction their lives would take from that point onward. And as they walked side by side toward the reserved room, both felt that something greater was at stake. The room where Nathaniel awaited them was grand, but there was something intimidating about its silence. The dark wood walls and golden details reflected an atmosphere of absolute power, where transformative decisions were made. Ben and Emma entered together but with different demeanors. He, tense and calculated; she, determined to face whatever came her way. Nathaniel, seated in a leather chair, greeted them with a cordial smile, but his eyes assessed their every move. "So, Ben," Nathaniel began in his deep voice, "what makes this project so revolutionary?" Ben, on autopilot from years of perfect presentations, began to outline the technical details with precision. But as he spoke, Nathaniel's focus seemed to shift toward Emma. He observed her intently, as though trying to understand why she was there. When Ben finished, Nathaniel turned to Emma and asked, "And you, Miss Morgan, what's your role in this grand vision?" Emma felt the weight of the question. There was no hiding now. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak with honesty. "My role is to remind everyone that projects like Ben's are about more than numbers. They can change lives, entire communities, just like sustainable tourism does in the small towns where I work." Her voice was firm but carried emotion. She explained how renewable energy and conscious tourism could work hand in hand to create real, accessible transformation. Nathaniel seemed intrigued, but he wasn't about to give in easily. "A noble idea, no doubt," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But don't you think that vision is a bit idealistic? In the real world, dreams like yours often stumble over bureaucracy and corporate interests." The room fell silent. Ben glanced at Emma, waiting for her reaction. With a spark in her eyes, Emma replied, "Dreams only stumble when we lack the courage to defend them. If we let bureaucracy win, the ones who pay the price are the people who need these changes the most." Her words resonated in the room, bold yet full of passion. Ben, who had always relied on charts and logical arguments, realized that Emma was achieving something he never could. She was reaching Nathaniel's human side. For a moment, Nathaniel was silent, seeming to consider what she had just said. Then, with an enigmatic smile, he turned back to Ben. "Maxwell, it seems you've found yourself a partner of equal measure. Someone who sees what many of us forget: the real impact behind the numbers." Ben felt a wave of relief and, at the same time, pride. Emma wasn't just representing him, she was surpassing expectations in ways he had never imagined. But Nathaniel wasn't done yet. "I'll be direct," he said. "I back projects that have soul. So far, Ben, your technology is flawless. But what interests me is the heart behind it. Can the two of you sustain this vision together? Because if you can't, it's not worth my investment." The question hung in the air like a verdict. For the first time, Ben found himself at a loss for words. This wasn't a technical challenge, it was personal. He looked at Emma, searching for an answer. Sensing his hesitation, she stepped forward. "The heart is right here," Emma said, placing her hand on her chest. "And it's not just mine. Ben has created something that can change the world, and I believe in it. We're ready to make it happen, together." Emma's words were like a decisive strike. Nathaniel stood, extended his hand to Ben, and with a satisfied smile, said, "Then we have a deal." The relief was palpable. Ben shook Nathaniel's hand firmly, but his gaze quickly turned to Emma. She had saved the moment, transforming what could have been just another negotiation into something authentic and inspiring. The weight of the event began to lift. Ben felt something shift inside him, and Emma, though exhausted, knew she had given her best. The event wasn't just a trial, it was a milestone. Deep down, they both understood that this night was only the beginning of something much bigger. As they left the room, Emma felt the lightness that only overcoming a challenge can bring. What had seemed like an impossible test had turned into a moment of personal victory. She looked at Ben, who walked beside her in silence, but with a different expression. It was as if the walls he had worked so hard to maintain were finally starting to crumble. Emma had shown him something he hadn't expected. It wasn't just his project that mattered, but the impact it could have on people. Ben didn't know exactly how to express what he was feeling. Throughout his career, he had celebrated many victories, but none felt as significant as this one. And it wasn't because of the funding Nathaniel had promised, it was because of how Emma had handled everything. She hadn't just impressed him, she had impressed everyone, including himself. For the first time, he saw the world in a different way, more human, more real. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations and words of praise. Emma, who had once feared she wasn't good enough for the event, was now the center of attention. Investors approached her, intrigued by her unique perspective. Ben watched from a distance, feeling a mix of pride and something deeper, something he dared not name. She was shining, and he knew it was exactly what she deserved. On the ride back to the mansion, the silence between them was comfortable, almost conspiratorial. Emma gazed out the window, lost in thought. Although she was happy, there was a sense that something greater was taking shape. Ben, seated beside her, felt the same. For the first time in a long while, he was more interested in the person beside him than in the numbers that usually filled his mind. When they arrived, Emma went straight to the garden. She needed a moment to herself to process everything that had happened. Ben followed her but kept his distance, respecting her space. She sat on a bench, breathing in the cool night air, and he, without knowing exactly why, felt the need to join her. It was the first time they shared a silence that seemed to say more than any words could. "You were incredible today," Ben said, finally breaking the silence. Emma turned to him, surprised by the direct compliment. "I was just being myself," she replied, with a shy smile. Ben chuckled softly, something rare for him. "And that's exactly what's impressive. You don't need masks." "I admire that." Emma remained silent, but the sparkle in her eyes said more than any response could. The conversation continued, but in a more personal tone. Ben, who rarely talked about himself, began to share parts of his life he had never told anyone. He spoke about the pain of losing his mother, about how his work had become a shield against the world, and about his fear of connecting with others. Emma listened intently, feeling that, at last, she was seeing the true Ben Maxwell. Emma in turn opened up as well. She spoke about her grandmother, her fears, and how, so often, she felt her dreams were too big for someone like her. Ben interrupted her with a seriousness that caught her off guard. "Your dreams aren't too big. You're big enough to make them happen." Those words echoed within Emma, bringing forth a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. That night, something shifted. It was no longer just a professional partnership that was forming. It was something deeper, more genuine. Ben, accustomed to building tangible things, was beginning to understand the value of intangible connections. And Emma, always so focused on caring for others, was starting to realize that maybe she, too, deserved to be cared for. As the stars sparkled above them, the reward of this journey became clear. It wasn't just the success of the event but the beginning of something neither had expected to find. Deep down, they knew this was only the start. Returning to their routines was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the event night. Yet, for Ben and Emma, nothing felt the same. Ben returned to his office, buried in piles of projects to review, but his mind frequently drifted to the previous evening, the sparkle in Emma's eyes, her impassioned words, and the way she had changed the event's dynamic. It was a new kind of distraction, but one he welcomed. Emma, on the other hand, resumed her work at the national park, but with a renewed spirit. Guiding tourists along familiar trails felt different now, as though every word she spoke carried a new weight. She had discovered something within herself, a confidence that once seemed far away. But along with this newfound strength came a restlessness. She couldn't stop thinking about Ben and what their partnership had awakened in her. Their communication started off practical. Ben reached out to discuss ideas for sustainable tourism and potential projects that could benefit communities near his ventures. Emma, in turn, shared her vision for integrating sustainability with environmental education. Gradually, their conversations grew less formal, filled with personal questions and moments of humor that Ben never would have imagined himself engaging in before. One afternoon, Ben showed up unexpectedly at the park. He claimed he wanted to learn more about Emma's work, but the truth was simpler: he wanted to see her. Emma, initially surprised, guided him through the trails with the same passion she showed every visitor. But this time, something was different. Ben wasn't just a curious businessman, he was someone genuinely interested in her world, and that touched her in a way she couldn't quite describe. As time passed, Ben's visits to the park became more frequent. Emma began to notice that he wasn't just learning about sustainable tourism, he was learning about her. And in doing so, Ben started to rethink his own life. For the first time, he questioned why he had isolated himself so much, why he preferred the silence of his mansion to the company of people who could enrich his journey. During one of these visits, as they walked along a quiet trail, Ben asked Emma about her dream of opening her own business. She hesitated but then spoke with honesty. "I've always wanted to create something that connects people to nature, something that could educate and inspire. But I never thought it was possible." Ben listened intently, and for the first time, he felt he could use his resources for something more meaningful than just technological innovation. The idea of working together began to take shape. Ben offered Emma not just financial support but also his business expertise. At first, she hesitated. She wanted to be sure she wasn't becoming dependent on him, but over time, she realized that what Ben was offering was more than help. It was a genuine partnership. They began sketching plans, merging their passions in ways neither had imagined before. These moments of collaboration brought them even closer. Emma, who once saw Ben as a distant and reserved man, now saw someone willing to change, to open up. And Ben, in turn, discovered in Emma an inspiration that went beyond her professional passion. She reminded him of why he had started his journey in the first place: to create something that truly made a difference. Their journey forward wasn't just about returning to their routines. It was about transforming their lives based on what they had learned together. For Ben, that meant allowing himself to be vulnerable, something he had never done before. For Emma, it was about believing in her ability to dream big and accepting help without feeling like it diminished her worth. And so, what began as a temporary agreement was turning into something much greater. Ben and Emma were no longer just allies on a project, they were becoming essential parts of each other's journeys. As they took these first steps toward the future, both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their first trip together was a milestone. Ben and Emma decided to visit a small village that needed renewable energy and had significant tourism potential. The location was remote, surrounded by breathtaking landscapes and a community that, despite its hardships, welcomed them warmly. For Emma, it felt like returning to her roots. For Ben, it was an entirely new world where his charts and data took on real faces and stories. On the first day, Emma stood out immediately. She spoke with the locals, learned about their needs, and proposed practical ideas to enhance local tourism. Ben, who initially observed from a distance, began to involve himself more. For the first time, he wasn't just the numbers guy. He was someone who listened, connecting his knowledge to the lives of real people. And in doing so, something within him began to change. The evenings in the village were simple, lit by candles and stars, a break from the hectic routines they both knew. One of those nights, sitting by a campfire, Ben and Emma shared stories they had never told anyone. Ben spoke about the pressure of always having to be perfect, of never being allowed to fail, while Emma revealed her fear of disappointing those who depended on her. Between confessions and laughter, they realized how much they were healing, not just through what they were doing but through how they supported each other. On the third day, something unexpected happened. During one of Emma's presentations about sustainable tourism, a community leader questioned whether she was truly committed to the cause or just exploiting the village for her own benefit. The critique hit her hard, reopening insecurities she thought she had overcome. Seeing her falter, Ben stepped in. With a firmness that surprised everyone, he defended Emma, highlighting her authenticity and dedication. Ben's intervention was a turning point, not just for the community, which began to trust Emma more, but for the two of them. That night, Emma thanked Ben with tears in her eyes. He responded with something he never thought he'd say, "You've taught me what it means to truly believe in someone." Those words lingered between them, like an unspoken but deeply felt promise. The trip ended with a sense of renewal for both. The village received its first solar panel installations, and Emma left behind concrete plans to start an ecotourism project in the region. Yet, the deepest impact was internal. Ben and Emma were no longer the same people who had arrived there. Something within them had been transformed, as if they had discovered a new reason to move forward. Back at the mansion, Ben seemed different. "Homie, ever perceptive, commented, you seem lighter." He simply smiled, something he rarely did but now seemed to happen more often. Emma, on the other hand, was brimming with ideas, eager to start planning her new initiative. Yet, even as they worked on their individual projects, both knew their journeys were now intertwined. In an unexpected gesture, Ben invited Emma to participate in a meeting with his team. He wanted her to present her ideas to a larger group, something he had never done before. Emma, initially hesitant, accepted, realizing he didn't just believe in her, he wanted her to shine in a space that once felt unreachable. Their mutual transformation wasn't marked by dramatic changes but by a series of small, deliberate steps towards something greater. Ben began opening up, not just to Emma but to those around him. And Emma, in turn, began to believe in the power of her voice, that she was capable of inspiring and leading. This journey of transformation was only the beginning. Day by day, Ben and Emma learned that love and mutual support could not only transform their lives but also create something lasting. Together, they were ready to face whatever came their way, not as isolated individuals, but as true partners in every sense. The launch of Ben and Emma's joint initiative was a modest event, but it was rich with meaning. In the middle of a breathtaking landscape, surrounded by the community they had helped, they unveiled their project, a sustainable ecotourism center that also provided renewable energy to the village. It was a seamless fusion of their passions, a living symbol of what they had built together. But more than that, it was proof that their connection had transformed not just their lives but also the lives of those around them. Ben, who had always avoided emotional speeches, surprised everyone by speaking candidly about his journey. He shared how he had started his company to overcome the limitations of his childhood but, in the process, had isolated himself. "I thought it was enough to create something grand," he admitted, glancing at Emma. "But what I've learned from Emma is that true greatness lies in the connections we build and the impact we leave on people." His words, though simple, resonated deeply. Emma, for her part, was more confident than ever. When it was her turn to speak, she explained how this project was more than a professional achievement. It's proof that even when we think our dreams are too big, there's always a way to make them real. And sometimes, the people we meet along the way help us see our own strength. Her eyes met Ben's, and for a moment, the world felt simpler, more certain. After the event, while everyone else celebrated, Ben and Emma slipped away for a quiet walk through the fields illuminated by solar panels. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken words. Ben finally broke the moment, pulling a small object from his pocket. It was a simple ring, uniquely designed with sustainable materials, something that perfectly reflected who they were. "Emma," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, "I never thought I'd meet someone like you. Someone who challenges me, inspires me, and, somehow, understands me. I don't want this to be just about projects or plans. I want it to be about us." He knelt, and Emma's heart raced. "Will you share this life with me? Build something that goes beyond what we've ever imagined." Emma laughed nervously, tears welling in her eyes. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" she said before nodding. "Yes, Ben. I'll marry you. But only if you promise this is just the beginning." He laughed too, something that was becoming increasingly natural for him, and held her hand firmly. Their wedding took place months later in an intimate ceremony surrounded by nature. It was simple, just as they wanted, but filled with symbolism. Every detail reflected who they were, two people who had found a way to turn their differences into something beautiful and enduring. For Ben, it was the first time in years that he felt he wasn't just achieving something but also belonging. For Emma, it was proof that dreams don't have to be solitary, they can be shared. Together, they continued to expand their projects, impacting communities and transforming lives. But more than that, they continued to grow as individuals. Ben discovered joy in the small things, in quiet moments with Emma. And she, in turn, found strength in knowing she didn't have to carry everything alone. The success of their story wasn't just in the results they achieved but in the transformation they experienced. Ben, once an isolated man, found in Emma the inspiration to open himself to the world. And Emma, always focused on others, found in Ben a partner who believed in her potential. Together, they discovered that the true meaning of gratitude, inspiration, and renewal lay in the journey they had walked side by side.